that there should be an extension of the SGR, but that was not given a definitive answer by China. What was given a definitive answer by China during the FOCAC summit was that the Tazara railway will be done. So China, having the knowledge that the Lobito corridor will be made, that the Lobito corridor will be a Western influence, specifically a US influence in Africa, they had to make that pledge of the Tazara railway so that they can now compete with influence within Africa.
现代化道路上一个都不能少，一国都不能掉队。
Well, the FOCAC summit, the FOCAC 2024, ended on the 6th of September, that is yesterday, and a lot could be taken from the summit where China hosted almost all Africans in Beijing to speak about the China-Africa cooperation. China and Africa go way back, and by the way, China is Africa's major trading partner. So it was very, very important to keep tabs with what is happening in Beijing for the past 4 days when Africa presidents were engaging with China to get better deals and to present their cases, as we're going to discuss. Well, one major factor that Africa got from the FOCAC 24 was that China pledged 51 billion to go to Africa for investments and different projects. Well, this was in contrast to what China, or many had thought that China will do, because many thought that China will not invest in major projects. Contrary to those thoughts, China decided to invest in major projects in Africa. Well, China has been a little bit slow in engaging in the BRI, that is Belt and Road Initiatives, part of Africa. We know that the Belt and Road Initiative touches Kenya in the port of Mombasa and the LAPSSET project at the port of Lamu. But China has been a bit slow in furthering the SGR to our neighboring countries, as well as finishing up the port of Lamu and opening the corridor, the northern corridor, towards South Sudan and Ethiopia. Well, a lot has been pledged by China, but not specifically touching the BRI, because that was, by the way, that was the pledge of our President Ruto, that the SGR has to be extended further to other countries. He clearly said that it is the interest of all countries that are involved, that is Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, that there should be an extension of the SGR. But that was not given a definitive answer by China. What was given a definitive answer by China during the FOCAC summit was that the Tazara railway will be done. That is the Tanzania-Zambia railway that ferries minerals from Zambia all the way to Tanzania, to the port of Tanzania, because Zambia is a landlocked country. So that was the specific project, huge project that China pledged $1 billion to finance that project, which was to many an unexpected move, because China, as well as the President Xi Jinping, clearly stipulated that China will be involved before the FOCAC summit. He gave that intuition that China will now be involved in small but beautiful things. So many thought that small but beautiful things will mean a reduction in the amount of capital that will be used in Africa. But contrary to everyone's opinions, contrary to everyone's thoughts, China decided to invest more in infrastructure projects across Africa. And further, China also tried as much as possible to give that idea that it is the leader of the Global South. We understand that the Global South has been discriminated for quite some time, and President Xi Jinping came out very clearly to say that China understands Africa, China is a friend to Africa, and that Africans deserve the kind of development that goes across the world. And he went specifically and tackled the Western nations by saying that Western nations offer development, but at a very painful struggle. That sometimes Western nations decide to hurt Africans they decide to hurt developing nations at the expense of development. So he said that China is not focused on that, and China, as a fellow developing nation, will be here to assist developing nations like Africa to move forward to the next level. So that was an appeal by China in one way or another to try and put itself in the shoes of Africans, of nations that are in Latin America, to appeal to them to be a nation that will care about them and will care about the struggle that Africans have gone through. The investment that China decided to make in Tanzania and Zambia through the Tazara railway that was signed by both President Samia Suluhu and President Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia was very, very fundamental, because China recognizes the projects that the G7, backed by the US, of course, are trying to do in Africa, and specifically the Lobito Corridor, the railway that spans across from Angola all the way to Tanzania, touching on DR Congo, majorly just also to ferry minerals and to ferry important goods from inland countries in Africa to the ports, either to the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. So China, having the knowledge that the Lobito Corridor will be made, that the Lobito Corridor will be a Western influence, specifically a US influence in Africa, they had to make that pledge of the Tazara Railway so that they can now compete with influence within Africa. We understand that Africa is the next frontier. Africa has a lot of opportunities, and Africa is waking up. For quite some time, these Western nations, or sometimes even the Eastern nations, have taken advantage of the lack of knowledge, of the corruption in Africa, to just embezzle the minerals in Africa, embezzle employment, cheap labor from Africa. But as at now, Africans have gone to school, they understand what is happening, and now it is a quest of influence, a quest of who is going to get favor from whichever government, so that they can get legitimate influence, legitimate power from the favor that they will get from governments within Africa. So that is the struggle that we are seeing, that came out very clearly from this FOCAC 24, that China is deliberately trying to fight off against the Western influence, specifically the US influence in Africa. We understand that the FOCAC summits happen in 3 years interval. That means that the last FOCAC was at the height of the COVID-19, and also within these 3 years, there has been a lot of Beijing versus Washington trade disagreements and heightened tensions on trade. So the economies of both countries are really fighting for space in the world, as well as there has been a slowdown in the economy of China. So this is the first FOCAC summit to come after the slowdown of the economy of China. And China was looking at capitalizing on every moment and every opportunity that it could get from African presidents who had gone there. Well, President Ruto also went to China and had bilateral discussions with Xi Jinping between Kenya and China. And President Ruto was particularly specific on what he wanted. He wanted the expansion of the SGR from Kenya to the neighboring countries. But that, as I said earlier, was not given a definitive answer, as well as you understand that President Ruto was one of the principal actors that were fighting President Kenyatta while he was deputy president, of seeking more money from China loans or Chinese loans. And now he's the president and went to China to do the same thing that his predecessor was doing, seeking loans. Of course, China would still want to invest in Africa. China will still specifically want to invest in Kenya. And President Ruto was very categorical in thanking Xi Jinping in the projects that have taken place in Kenya, specifically the intelligence highway, that all rural roads that were earmarked by China had been partaken, as well as this is coming just months after the Gen Zs or Kenyans took to the streets to protest against tax hikes across the nation that were brought about by the Finance Bill 2024. The Finance Bill 2024 was withdrawn, and now we're using the Finance Bill 2023. that puts Kenya in a precarious situation because the credit rating of the nation right now is very, very poor, as well as no organization or no country will want to invest in a country that has a poor credit rating. As this is coming right now, Kenya still needs the loans to continue to progress. Perhaps the silver lining is the fact that Kenya doesn't have so much owed to China because Kenya has distributed its portfolio in terms of loans, and much of the money that is owed is from foreign bonds. These are mostly Western organizations that Kenya has borrowed from, and not China. So China still has a leeway to assist Kenya, and that is why it was very important, or the president saw it very important for him to go and present himself and try as much as possible to get some loans from the Republic of China. Well, other presidents also had their asks from Xi Jinping. For example, Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe criticized his country's media and African media for failing to tell their own story while praising Chinese outlets for supporting national development. Another president that also had something to ask from the Chinese government or Xi Jinping was the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who said that there is a need to have a balanced trade. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu was very, very firm in saying that there is a need to have fairer trade terms and infrastructure development. As well as, to finish up, William Ruto asked for green solutions and better loaning terms to African nations. He has been very fiercely advocating for that ever since he stepped into office, from Europe to US to now China, asking for better loan terms and better rates that Africans are getting loans compared to other countries across the world, more so in the global north. One thing that we have to be very keen about is the worry that many analysts have regarding China and regarding Chinese loans. The fact that sometimes China promises a lot, and sometimes these promises are never met at the end of the day. They can promise all these projects, but things come in the way and some of these projects are not accomplished. Also, something to maybe ponder on is the fact that we are in 2024. Many African countries are maybe 30, 40 years, 50 past the independence, but we are still going to outside nations to beg for money. Are we still in that era, Africa? Till next time, like, subscribe, and share.